So before I hand over to our speakers today, who are going to talk you through our Working Life Scotland report, I'd just like to give you a wee bit of an update on what activity has taken place since we launched the forum in March at our annual conference in Edinburgh. Seems like not that a long time ago, but actually so much has changed since the beginning of March. So we had our first Public Policy Forum event in April, which was to introduce our members in Scotland to our kind of key areas of focus for public policy. And about 70 to 80 of you joined us on that day, and I'm delighted to say we have nearly 150 of you here today. So that was an event that's taken place. We've also, a key area of focus for us as a forum is to respond to consultations. So we submitted a response to the Scottish Parliament Economy Committee recently. So they called for views on the impact of COVID-19 on Scotland's businesses, workers and the economy. The response has been published on the Scottish Parliament website, so please do go and have a look and see what we are saying, and it will be considered by the committee. Hopefully many of you have seen some of the recent press activity with CIPD in Scotland. I think that's a really good opportunity to raise our profile as a profession. So we've had some press coverage on the impact of the job retention scheme on redundancies, on home working, and also in our latest labour market outlook report. And then obviously this week we launched our Working Life Scotland report and had some great coverage earlier on in the week. We continue to engage with MSPs, and I'm delighted to say that our next Policy Forum event is a virtual event with opposition MSPs, Donald Cameron and Jackie Bailey, who will be discussing Scotland's post-pandemic economy, and that's on the 14th of July, and I think that's available for you to book now as well. And then another area, lastly, is around our research. And it's about developing our own policy and evidence base in Scotland. And that leads me really nicely to the session that we're running today. Before I get started and introduce our speakers, I've got a couple of practical things to run through with you. Fingers are crossed that technology is going to be kind to us. You've all been placed on mute, and we'll have some time at the end of the session for questions and answers. So please post your questions into the Q&A box as you think of them, and we'll try our best to cover them as we go through the session, and particularly at the end. The session's been recorded. For those of you that can't join us today, or for people who can't join us today, and the slides will be made available afterwards. We'll try and stick to our 60 minutes. And the audience is varied in terms of background and experience, so we'll try our best to cover something of interest to all of you. So what have we got planned for today? Earlier this week, hopefully you'll all be aware, we launched our first CIPD Scotland Working Lives report. And that provides a unique snapshot of job quality in Scotland. So we have two speakers for you today. So I'm first of all delighted to introduce Professor Graham Roy to you. Graham is the Director of the Fraser of Allender Institute and Head of Economics at the University of Strathclyde. As well as being an experienced academic, he also has experiences working as a senior civil servant in government. Graham will talk to you also a little bit about a new project that was launched this week called Propel. I would steal his thunder, but so we're delighted to be a partner of the Propel project with lots of other academics across the UK. For those of you that I'm sure Graham will tell you more, Propel stands for Productivity Outcomes of Workplace Practice, Engagement and Learning, and I need to read that bit because it doesn't sometimes slip off the tongue. And then of course we have Marek Zemanik, who is our CIPD Scotland Senior Policy Advisor, who will talk to you through some insights from the report, what this could mean for you, for policymakers and practitioners across Scotland. And I'd just like to say, I hope you enjoy the session, and I'd like to pass over to Graham now. Over to you, Graham.
Great, thank you very much, Lee, and good afternoon, everyone. And Lee, well remembered for well done in remembering what Propel stands for.
I read it.
Good morning, colleagues. What I'd like to do is as Lee said, is do two things with you. Just give you a brief introduction to Propel and um, give you a bit of an overview about what that is, and also encourage you to look into what we're doing and engage with us in the months and weeks ahead. And then before handing over to Marek, to give you a brief overview of the economic context and how that is shaping the Working Lives Scotland report. And I should just say, I think, just congratulate CIPD on the report. I think it's an excellent report. If you haven't had a chance to read it in full yet, I do encourage you to read it. There's some really interesting insights about the workplace in Scotland just now. So briefly, just what is the Propel Hub? This is a new initiative that, as Lee said, is bringing together CIPD and also 7 universities across the UK to try and take the latest international and cutting edge research and evidence and turn that into practical insights for HR practitioners, line managers and business owners. And what we're doing is we're looking at a number of different themes, from managing people through boosting innovation, well-being, how to engage with employees, supporting diversity, and trying to take the latest research and turn that into useful insights for people. And one of the challenges that we face as academics is, how do we actually go out and relate the academic research we're doing to actual practical measures for people who are working on a day-to-day basis. And similarly, from your perspective, it can often be quite difficult for you to tap into that academic knowledge and that academic insight. So the aim of the hub is to try and bridge that gap. And over the next coming months and next 2 to 3 years, we'll be doing a number of different things, from webinars, masterclasses, various engagement supported by CIPD, to come out and explain that research and turn that into practical insights and what works. And I guess the current time for all of this could be more important. And if you look at the economic context that we face now, as you know, this is purely unprecedented in terms of the economic crisis and the economic shock that is hitting our economy. And the chart there just shows you the scale of the change that we've seen in our economy. So this number, these lines essentially just show you what's happening to turnover across different businesses, sectors in Scotland. And you see that essentially, ever since the financial crisis, things have been ticking along relatively nicely, but an enormous scale back in day-to-day activity since the shutdown of arising from COVID-19. And if anything, we estimate that up to about a quarter of all normal day-to-day economic activity in Scotland is currently displaced. About 20% of businesses in Scotland are actually paused trading, and those who are still trading have seen their revenues fall by over a half. So a truly extraordinary hit to our economy. But it's really important to understand the channels as managers, to really understand the channels and the nature of that impact. So on the one hand, on a glass half full perspective, the causes of the recession are temporary and quite deliberate. And once we get through the public health crisis, then our economy should start to be able to build back to some form of normality. However, unfortunately, the scale of the shock is so significant that some form of structural damage is likely to be inevitable. And the impacts of all of this are not likely to be distributed evenly. So they will vary by sector, by region, by business, household, city and rural. And truly, again, to give you an idea of the scale of the challenge that we're facing here, about 600,000 people in Scotland are on a job retention scheme, about a further 200,000 in Northern Ireland. And when you add in an extra 150,000 on the self-employment schemes, you see it, a really scale of that, the scale of the challenge that we face. And turning to what this means for the labour market, if we could go to the next slide, again, these charts are quite interesting just to show you the scale of the shock that we're seeing in our economy now. This chart here is vacancies in the UK economy, so the number of vacancies that are slushing around the labour market at a given point in time. And you see that as the economy was doing quite well in the run-up to the crisis, vacancies were quite high. There's a large number of opportunities for people, but they've fallen off a cliff in the last few weeks. And one of the really interesting things that we're thinking about from an economic perspective is how do we get through the next few weeks and months, support through the recovery, but also then what does that new normal look like in terms of opportunities for new jobs being created, but crucially changes in the ways of working. So we're all becoming used to being much more flexible in the way that we're working. We're becoming much more used to operating on a digital basis. That's having significant implications for productivity. It's got big implications for line management, for HR, human resources, big implications for well-being. So for many people, the new ways of working are an opportunity to improve our well-being. But for many other people, working from home brings challenges and might not always be associated with improvements in their well-being. So leadership and management in this new normal, this transition through to this new world that we're going to operate in, is absolutely crucial in all of this. And this is where the Working Lives Scotland report is really insightful and adds some really interesting insights to what people are facing and what the nature of how the labour market and employment is changing. So I'll hand over now, and I'm more than happy to answer any questions or pick up anything in the Q&A that comes later on. Thank you.
Thanks, Graham. After that avalanche of positive news, I'll try and spread some cheer now. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Marek Zemanik. I'm the Senior Public Policy Advisor for CIPD Scotland. I'm responsible for writing this report. This is the first time this has ever been done in Scotland by the CIPD. It's obviously an area that we were quite active in the past, especially UK-wide. But this is really the first sort of dedicated report on job quality in Scotland. I just want to run you through some of the key findings, not all of them, of course, because there's heaps of them, and I would echo Graham's very kind words. If you want to read a little bit more, and the report is very easily accessible online, and there will be lots more data in there. I thought I'd start off by covering a little bit of the background. For those of you who joined us for the first Policy Forum session a couple of months ago, you will have seen me mention this already. Why is it that we at the CIPD focus on job quality? Well, it's because it's at the heart of what we do. Our purpose as an organization is to champion better work and working lives. So it makes sense that job quality is at the heart of our research and our public policy agenda and all the work that we do to support practitioners as well, of course. Over the last few years, you may have seen some of this. We have conducted what's called the UK Working Lives Survey, which is something we do in cooperation with YouGov, a big survey of over 5,000 people across the UK, from which we then produce various reports, the latest one being the Good Work Index that was published just a couple of weeks before the Working Lives Scotland report. These reports, the very nature of them, because they are based on a much broader sample size, provide a lot more detail. It allows a lot more of a granular look at job quality across the UK compared to, for example, the Scottish report. But because they've been running for the last 3 years, they also allow to track certain changes over time. So it's very interesting to have a look at some of the changes in job quality that we have seen UK-wide. So again, if something that I talk about over the coming few minutes captures your interest, I would urge you to have a look at the Good Work Index as well, in addition to the Scottish report. There's also a very interesting new online tool, which is something that we've done for the first time this year, which is where you can go and sort of pick specific occupations and specific jobs and look at how they compare on the sort of various dimensions of job quality. I find it very interesting anyway, and hopefully you will too. Job quality in general has become more interesting for policymakers in the last few years. Matthew Taylor's review of working practices, for example, the UK government has picked it up. There's various regional charters in Manchester, for example, in London, etc. They all talk about job quality and the importance of job quality. But as I like to say, of course, Scotland was there first. We had our Fair Work Convention, which was set up in 2015, which then produced its Fair Work Framework in 2016. And our report, Working Lives Scotland, is actually written around these 5 fair work dimensions. Now, the session today, I'm going to try really hard not to bore you to death with a long series of graphs. I was going to try and make it a little bit more interesting. ask a few questions. We have a few polls set up, which we've never tried before, so it will be quite interesting experiment to see if it works, but hopefully it does, and we'll be able to make this a little bit more interactive. Now, I will start, when I say interactive, by asking you this question. What is fair work? Now, I would like you to use your chat box and just make sure that you send messages to all panelists and attendees as well, please. And if you just type in the first thing that comes to your mind when I say fair work. Some of you might well be familiar with the Fair Work Convention and the Fair Work Framework already. But for those of you who are not, especially, what is the sort of thing that comes to your mind when somebody says fair work? I'd be quite interested to hear if there's a bit of a convergence on certain ideas. Of course, fairness is one of those terms that is often favored by especially political strategists, for example, because of course it can mean many different things to many different people. You know, fairness. Who disagrees with fairness? Fairness is a good thing, but what does it actually mean in the context of fair work? Okay, so I've got a few things here. Fair pay, safe work environment, make sure you're not getting taken advantage of, equal treatment, opportunity, reward matching your input. Okay, very good, thank you. Excellent. There seems to be a few Olivia Carsons joined in, so that's an interesting glitch. Let's see how that keeps going. Okay, so treating everybody and respect. A little bit of security. Okay, right, excellent. Involvement in decisions that affect you. Okay. Excellent. Good. Well, thank you very much for that. If actually quite a lot of that stuff, somebody's actually already identified exactly what the Fair Work Framework is. So well done, somebody who is clearly familiar with the Fair Work Convention's work. So these are the 5 elements of fair work as conceptualized by the convention: respect, security, opportunity, fulfillment, and effective voice. So quite a few of you mentioning effective voice, the ability to speak up and influence decisions. Respect, making sure you treat people fairly, considering their circumstances. Security is quite an important one. That's probably the one that always comes to mind in terms of fair pay, in terms of contract security, etc. But there's things like job design as well. Do you have meaningful jobs? Do you have the appropriate level of job autonomy? Do you use your skills well, etc. So I'll be covering all of these over the next sort of half an hour, hopefully. I've got quite a lot to get through, so I'll be nipping on. All of the slides, of course, will be available afterwards as well to everybody. So if you miss something, then you can come back there. Of course, all of it can be found in the report itself. So I'll start with respect. Respect covers a broad range of things, but some of the things that I want to look at are health and well-being, relationships at work, and flexible working. All things that actually have become important. And even more important over the last few months during the pandemic. Health and well-being in particular. If any of you have seen any of the coverage that we received when we launched the report, or if any of you had the misfortune of hearing me on the radio on Tuesday morning, health and well-being seems to be the focus of most of the coverage, because it really captures people's imagination, because it is very important. It is important not just to individuals, but it's also important to the economy as a whole. And we know from past research that actually health and well-being as a job quality dimension has the strongest correlation with things like job satisfaction and job enthusiasm, for example, as well. And we also know that there's a big hit to the economy if people drop out of the labor market because of ill health, for example, because of mental health. An estimated 300,000 people that drop out of the UK labor market every year because of long-term mental health issues, to a cost of up to £99 billion to the economy. Those are big, significant numbers. So these are, of course, statistics that are of interest to both policymakers and also to employers. Just to clarify, all the figures that you will see here now are taken from the Working Life Scotland report, so they are all our figures. They all relate to Scottish employees. It's all done by YouGov. It's all weighted to be representative of the labour market in Scotland. So it's not just pulled out of thin air. It's statistically sound. What I will try and do is, if there are any sort of things that stand out in terms of differences with the rest of the UK or the UK-wide figures, I will try and pull them out. But broadly, the message is actually that the findings are broadly similar for Scotland and for the UK as a whole. So the first thing I want to show you is this one here, which is work's impact on mental and physical health. You will see here that about 30% of people, so almost a third of people, are saying that work is impacting negatively on their mental health, which is of concern. 25% saying it's impacting negatively on their physical health as well. Now, if you look at some of the conditions that people talk about that they have experienced over the past year, musculoskeletal problems, sleep problems, anxiety, depression, these are some of the most common ones. And when you ask people whether they think that their job was a contributing factor to these conditions, people say that yes, their work was identified as a clear contributing factor to them, to these conditions. In the case of anxiety, especially 66%, I find it quite staggering. Okay, I'll move on to the next slide here. Another question that we ask, which is a bit broader, which is a sort of broad question of how do you feel at work? And there's some very interesting findings here, for example, as well. You feel full of energy, enthusiastic about your job, etc., etc. I think the thing I would pull out here is the exhausted figure there. 24%, that's a quarter of people, are saying that they always or often feel exhausted at work. I found it a bit higher than I expected when I was pulling this together, I must say. All these health and well-being issues tie in with one issue that is of particular research interest to us at the CIPD, which is the issue of presenteeism. Presenteeism very simply means going to work despite not feeling well enough to do so. So one of the questions that we ask in the survey is, have you ever done that? Well, have you done that at some point over the last 3 months? So it's not as broad as saying over the last 12 months. For the last 3 months, have you done that? Now, I wanted to use this opportunity to see if you, as HR professionals or HR academics, can guess what the percentage was that we got back. So I'm going to try and run this poll and cross everything that I have. That it works. So hopefully this has now come up for you, and see, we'll leave it running for about a minute and see if you can guess what the right answer was there. So the question was, how many people do you think told us that they went to work despite not feeling well enough in the last 3 months? Right there. Okay, so most people going for the most concerning numbers there, 70%, 55%. Almost 2/3 of you voting there, so that's pretty good. I'll give it another 20 seconds and then we'll see where we are. All right. Okay. Right, and now I'm going to share the results. I hope this is coming up for everybody. People see it? Nods of the head, maybe. Yep, excellent. Right, so we got most of you guessing 70%, 55% is the second one, and then 40% the one after that. The right answer, so I'm just trying to do a few things at the same time, is not quite as pessimistic as you thought. So it's 55%. I mean, that is still of concern, that over half all workers are saying that they are going to work despite not feeling well enough to do so. Of course, the immediate question after that is, why? Why are they going to work if they're not feeling well enough to go to work? And that's why we asked them as well, who do you feel pressure from when you decide to do that? And the answer there is probably quite interesting. I think as expected, 85% say that they feel pressure from themselves. The thing that is of slight concern is you get 31%, so that's almost a third of people saying that they felt pressure from their manager. Now, this doesn't mean that their manager was pressuring them to do it, by the way. This just means that they perceive pressure from their from their manager to go to work. Okay, I'll move on to the next slide, which is relationships at work. Now, I should clarify, this does not mean romantic relationships at work. I should clarify it. It's something that came up when we were running through this yesterday, and it's not something I considered. Relationships at work. Now, relationships at work are incredibly important, and at this time, I always like to highlight this incredible study that has been done in the States. It's the Harvard Grant study. Many of you will probably be familiar with it. It's a study that has tracked the lives of 200 people over a period of 75 years. It's a very unique study. There's a few of them still alive, I think, in their 90s just now. And anyway, the study found that positive social relationships are the single most important determinant of a happy and healthy life. Even more important than income, than education or social class background as well. So that is how important relationships are. And that includes relationships at work as well, of course. So if you look at some of the questions and some of the ratings here, you'll find what our workers in Scotland told us in terms of their relationships. There's a lot more questions in the report as well in terms of relationships with managers, for example. I didn't put this in here because I didn't quite want to overwhelm you, but you can go and look those up. And these numbers are pretty much the same across the UK as well, in case anybody was wondering over that. Right, flexible working. Flexible working is something that we've done quite a lot of work on at the CIPD, and it is of considerable interest. And it has, of course, increased in interest significantly in the last few months with a huge shift that we've had towards home working across the UK as well. What I wanted to do is I want to use the next poll to ask you what sort of flexible work arrangements are being made available to workers across your organizations, and then just see if I can compare that with the results that we have had for our employees. So I'm just going to launch that again. Hopefully you'll be able to see that. Give it a minute or so. And this should be a multiple choice question, so you can pick every single one that is made available for your workers. What would the first two? Everybody, okay. All of those should be pretty obvious. Flexi-time, job sharing, reduced hours, working from home. Ideally, I would say try and think of normal circumstances, not right now. I should have probably clarified that before. And the other thing I should have clarified, which I of course forgot, to say that these are all anonymous. So I will not actually see your answers. I will not be able to attribute your answers to any of this, and nobody will be able to do that. It's all done anonymously. So there are some later on questions which are a bit more sort of not personal, but a bit more sort of sensitive. So those will all be anonymous, of course. Okay, so let's just end that. And the results here. Right. Well, these are amazing numbers, and if this was reflected in the employee survey, that would be a really positive result for flexible working. You got 83% saying working from home, flexi-time and working from home are the two most popular ones. Well, that actually is reflected in the employee survey as well. You've got flexi-time being most used and working from home being most used as well, and available as well. So the thing to remember about this, of course, is that there has been a big shift towards working from home over the last few months. We'll need to wait and see whether it actually maintains and changes the sort of longer term statistic. There are some indications that would suggest it will, because we know that employees are now more likely to request this, and employers are telling us that they are probably more likely to grant those requests as well. So it's likely that there will be a shift. But the one thing that I would emphasize is that flexible working is not just working from home. Many different kinds of flexible working. We need to look at why there are certain organizations that simply do not offer certain kinds of flexible working options at all. And also, secondly, why is there, in some cases, a big difference between availability and actual use of flexible work options? So if you look at the compressed hours bit here, for example, you see about 30% of employees say it's available to them, but only 9% are saying that they are actually using this. Why is there such a big gap? You can understand that in reduced hours, right? Because that would mean probably loss in wages. But why is there such a big difference in compressed hours? Is it because they don't want to feel like they're being left out from being a member of a team, if they only work 4 days a week, etc., etc. So it's interesting stuff that we all need to, I think, look into and we'll keep looking into. Okay, so that's the first respect chapter done. I'll be moving on to security. Security is mostly issues around pay, terms and conditions of your contracts. Of course, includes objective and subjective measures as well. Objective being how much you get paid. Subjective measures, do you think you're getting paid enough? So we cover both of those in the report. There's some limitations into what you can ask people about in a survey of this kind. And of course, because our sample is a sample of 1,000, it's quite a small number of people, for example, 0 hours contract. So we can't really do a granular analysis of that. But there's of course more work to be done on that. This is the first one I wanted to show you. So this is looking at the ratings of life satisfaction and job satisfaction by salary band, and probably not entirely surprising. You will see that the higher on a salary band you seem to be, the higher your life satisfaction and the higher sort of your job satisfaction as well. I would like to make 2 points, I think, at this stage. One of them, we look at the difference between the job satisfaction and life satisfaction percentages for the lowest paid band. 69% satisfied with a job, 61% satisfied with their life. So that to me again just suggests that a job is not everything. You know, a good job is not a determinant of a happy and satisfied life. And the other point I would like to make, I mean, there's no getting away from the fact that the more you get paid, there's a clear correlation between life satisfaction and job satisfaction and a higher salary. But there are some clear trade-offs that we have identified in these reports over the last few years in the UK-wide reports as well, where people on higher salaries, for example, they will trade off a higher salary for poorer work-life balance, for example, or workload or stress levels, etc. Something that I will come back to as well. Okay, now this is where we come to some of the subjective questions, which is the sort of question of work centrality. One of the questions that we ask our employees is whether they agree or disagree with this statement. I would enjoy having a paid job even if I did not need the money. That would be quite interesting just to see what you as attendees of this webinar thought of that. So let me just launch this next poll. So this is not a question of what you think people answer. This is about what you personally think. And again, just to emphasize, this will be entirely anonymous, so I will not be able to identify you. Some of the other questions that we ask in this area are: do you agree that a job is just a way of earning money? And then also, you know, considering the responsibility of my job, I think I get paid appropriately. Okay. So quite a lot of people seem to be in agreement with the statement. I'll give it about 10 seconds and I'll share the results. I don't actually know if you can see the results coming up as I see them coming in. You'll probably just see the results as I share them. Okay. All right, here we go. So that's the results. The vast majority of you agree with that statement. 60% agree, and around 20% strongly agree. So that's actually 80% agreeing with that statement. It's quite remarkable. So the results of our employees are here. So that's 53%, over half of our employees say that they would enjoy having a paid job even if they did not need the money. There's an interesting sort of inverse U relationship there, actually, if you look at the salary bands. So the highest percentage of agreement is in the lowest salary bands and in the highest salary bands as well. We get into the reasons for why that potentially is. Another thing that we ask about in this area is this measure of underemployment and overwork. We ask people, how many hours per week do you work? And then we also ask them, how many hours per week would you like to work, considering the need to make a living? And from that, when I just combine those two, we come up with these measures of underemployment and overwork. Now, contrary to some of the narratives that you may have heard in the media over the last few years, we actually find that 87% of people work at least as much as they would like to, and it's only about 8% who say they would like to work at least 5 or more hours than they currently do. That's also in line with the sort of official statistics as well, ONS statistics. On the overwork measure, that's already something different. You'll see about 64% of people say that they are actually overworked to a certain degree. Right, I'll move on to opportunity. I need to keep moving because we need a little bit of time for Q&A, of course. So I think I'll just speed up a little bit. Maybe I'm speaking too slowly. Opportunity. Obviously, there's limitations of what we can do in a survey of this kind, asking about hiring practices. That's for a survey for employers, but this is more about what sort of opportunities do you have to find employment and progress and develop your skills. These are the sort of answers that you get for my job offers good prospects, for career advancements or development of skills. Now, it's actually when you drill down into some of the differences is when things get really interesting. There's obviously some differences between occupational class, I think, as you would expect. But the thing that I wanted to pull out were these two issues here. If you look at responses by gender, even though there's no difference in the answer on skills development, there is a very clear difference actually in the answer on prospects for career advancement. So a much higher percentage of women say that they disagree that their job offers good prospects for career advancement, which to me would suggest the existence of this perceived glass ceiling that we often hear about. The other thing I want to point out was this interesting drop in opportunities for skills development for older workers, and you could say that it's because the workers are at a particular stage in their careers, but that actually doesn't then explain why those in the oldest age bracket identify those skills development opportunities as much higher again. So this is actually something that we want to look at a little bit more. We are part of a new initiative called the Age at Work Network, collaborating with other organizations and academics as well. So there's more work to be done on that. I looked specifically into the issue of people with disabilities as well, because this has been of interest to public policymakers for the last few years, just to see whether the answers were slightly different, if there's something that we can identify. In line with previous research, we'll see that people with disabilities are more likely to work part-time, more likely to be underemployed. They are more likely to say that they would find it difficult to find a job which is as good as they currently have. Of concern is that they have higher levels of presenteeism. So 63% of people with disabilities have said that they went to work despite not feeling well enough to do so, versus 52% of people without disabilities. The thing that I found personally very surprising is in the question of relationship with managers. I said we asked about 9 questions about what the people's relationships are with their managers, and across every single one of them, people with disabilities have said that they have worse relationships with their managers. That to me suggests that there's probably a bit of a gap there in terms of management training, especially in this respect. Okay, fulfillment, we talk about workload, job autonomy, meaningful work, whether you have the right resources to do the job that you have, etc., etc. Workload, we've got about 34% of people saying that their workload is too high in a week. Interestingly, if you look at the sectors, the occupational classes, this is not confined to higher paid or lower paid jobs. The highest actually is the professional category and the sales and customer service category. And if you look at it by salary band, there are actually no discernible differences. So it's actually the nature of the job rather than, you know, whether you are in a higher paid sector or lower paid sector. That is the main sort of culprit here. Linked to it, of course, the idea of work-life balance. I see over a quarter of people saying that they will find it difficult to relax in their personal time because of their job. This is one of those things which is quite significantly worse for example, managers and senior officials. This plays into the idea of trading off certain elements of job quality against others. I think I'm going to skip this poll because I'm running rapidly out of time. This is one of my favorite questions in the whole survey, which is we are asking people about the meaningfulness of their work. You know, I'm highly motivated by my organization's purpose. I have a feeling of doing useful work for society, useful for my organization. And you will find that actually the question on doing useful work for society, the Scottish numbers are much better compared to the UK-wide numbers. And the reason for that is there's a big difference between the public sector and the private sector, and the answer is here. The public sector, you've got about 76% of people saying that they do meaningful work for society. Private sector is about 45%. And obviously in Scotland, we have a bigger public sector, which then translates into these figures. This is very important, overqualification, skills utilization, you know, saying that they have, making sure that the qualifications that you have match the job that you have. If there's a mismatch there, it suggests inefficiencies in the labor market. We hear a lot about graduates, for example, being stuck in so-called low-skilled jobs. And might be differences that need to be made to the skills development system, for example. And there's, you know, as you would expect, a very clear relationship between salary bands and so-called overqualification. And that then by extension is linked to occupational classes. So you will see that the highest percentage of people who say that they are overqualified can be found in the sort of three lowest occupational classes: sales and customer services, process plant, machine operatives, and elementary. Elementary, that's most of the jobs that you don't need any formal qualifications for, cleaners, for example, or some agricultural workers, etc. Okay, the very last one, and I'll literally whiz through this quickly, is effective voice. This is asking about the availability of various voice channels to employees in their workplace. The biggest thing that's of concern here is this none of the above figure. That almost 20%, almost a fifth of all workers are saying that they have no voice channel at work. And that is of concern because, of course, you know, voice channels could be in one-to-one meetings with your line manager or team meetings. So it's quite a significant proportion of employees who will say that they have no access to any of those. There's a big difference there between the public and the private sector here. This is the sort of summary of those findings. This is almost exclusively linked to organizational size. Public sector employees are very likely to work for large organizations, for example, like the NHS, of course, and the availability of various voice channels is quite different across, you know, depending on organizational size. For example, if you look at the none of the above, the percentage of those who say that they have no voice channel is about 36% for those who work in the smallest businesses versus about 8% to those who work for very, very large businesses. Also, some interesting differences in manager responsiveness. But I will let you look those up yourself in the report as a little teaser. Okay. In conclusion, just very briefly, if there's anything that we found job quality is not universal. There's obvious trade-offs and there's obvious inequalities. There's some clear differences by salary level, by occupation, some by gender, some by age, some by disabilities as well. I think it's quite worrying when you hear some of the coverage talking about the prospects for the labor market over the coming months, large-scale unemployment. I think we are at a danger where the focus will switch back to simply focusing on the number of jobs rather than on job quality. I think our main message from the report, and I think over the coming months, will be that we must not lose sight of job quality, and that's not only because I genuinely believe it is the right thing to do for individuals, but because the recession cannot be a step backwards in this regard. And it's not only important for individual well-being, it's also important for businesses themselves and for the economy. There's more and more research that shows a link between job quality and productivity. And all these things that we heard about over the last few weeks are all dimensions of job quality: job security, work-life balance, health and well-being. These all suddenly gain new meanings. People have rediscovered their importance in their own individual ways as well. So our key message to both policymakers and practitioners would be: it's now actually more important than ever to focus on this. And we really hope that some of the findings in the report will be useful and can be used to promote this. Okay, we have 10 minutes for a Q&A. Olivia, I think you're
yeah, we've got 10 minutes for questions now. So we've had a couple of questions from some of the many Olivia Carson. So again, apologies for anyone who hasn't got their own name attributed to them. Okay, so first question: will young people move away from the idea of a gig economy by creating a rush to job security? Might it mean more interest in being employed in the public sector, armed forces, etc.? That might be one for you, Graham, and if Marek's got any thoughts.
Great, yeah. So I've actually just typed up an answer, so I can put that round the group if everyone can see that. Okay, but so I think there's an opportunity for that to definitely be the case to an extent, though I still think that the drive towards digital working, the fourth industrial revolution, will be an overriding force when we come through all of this. In some ways that might be accelerated. I think there's a really interesting follow-on to your great question, which is about the nature of the support mechanism for people who become unemployed. And one of the things that this crisis has highlighted is just how challenging it can be for people when they lose their job, even temporarily, to find new work, and the financial implications of that. And if you look at some of the other countries, such as in Europe, Denmark, Scandinavia, there's a much greater investment in people through their entire working life. So if you lose their job, that financial support is still there, and it supports you to retrain and move into work. So I think there's some really interesting questions around the nature of the support mechanism that provides people security, even if they're in jobs which are quite highly flexible, and we perhaps need to rethink that as a society.
Thanks, Graham. That's great. And just in case anyone missed that, Graham's typed his answer in the Q&A box as well. So if anyone wants to have a read of that. Marek, have you got anything to add on that?
I mean, I would just echo what Graham said there, which is that, if anything, the last few weeks have certainly challenged what our view is of what essential workers are. And I hope that that there will be a recognition of that amongst public policymakers, but also amongst practitioners. We have all rediscovered, I think, what amazing work teachers do, being stuck at home with children trying to juggle work, etc., etc. So there will be a seismic shift that will be coming, definitely.
Thanks, Marek. The next question is: if the seismic shock is likely to create structural economic damage, what are the policy levers available in Scotland to prevent the negative employment landslide that will follow? Again, Graham's typed up his answer, which is great, but I don't know if you just want to relay that, Graham. We've got a couple of people dialed in, so just so that
So again, it's a great question. I'd probably highlight 5 key issues there, and there's many more, and I'm sure I'll miss some of them. But I think first and foremost, we can't underestimate the importance of a safe recovery. So actually getting policy right in terms of how we start back our economy is absolutely crucial, because if we have a setback, then the potential risks to our economy are amplified. So that's about getting the testing and tracing system safe, so we try and mitigate or minimise the risk of a second wave as much as possible. It means getting the careful balance of restarting schooling right. It also means a really careful balancing act in terms of the lifting of restrictions and also rolling back of financial support and making sure that these are aligned and boosting confidence. Now, not all of these are Scottish government. Some of them are Scottish government, some of them are UK government, some are local government. So the importance of delivery and coordination is crucial there. The second thing I highlight is that, like it or not, and with the best will in the world and as much support as it can provide, unemployment will rise. So we know from history a key issue about skills, training, employability, particularly young people, to avoid that scarring early on is absolutely crucial. There's likely to be a need for further stimulus while the private sector gets back on its feet. So that will mean investment in infrastructure, higher government spending in the medium term. That's not all in the gift of the Scottish government, so they're probably needed to rely on stimulus in the UK government, but there are reprioritisations that the Scottish government can do to shift money from some areas into areas which will have a greater impact. And support for business then is crucial in that. So the role of Scottish Enterprise, Highlands Islands Enterprise, support for recapitalisation. And we've touched on this, I think, already. One of the comments around actually now's an opportunity to think about these policy responses into the type of new normal we want to get back to. So how can we learn the lessons from the economy we had pre-COVID and issues around well-being and productivity, flexible working, inequalities, and use these investments to try and shape how we recover through these aspects.
Thanks, Graham. That's great.
The only thing, Graham is the expert here, but the only thing I would add to that is the importance of innovation and R&D and harnessing sort of the power of our incredible universities in Scotland and linking it with some of the business innovation that is happening already. I think there's a lot more work that can be done on joining those two.
Great. So this is a question for you, Marek. Is there enough data in the report to split by ethnicity?
So the short answer is unfortunately no. There may well be over time. Of course, the UK wide numbers are a bit different because that's a survey that was done of 5,000 people UK wide over a period of 3 years. There's 15,000 responses that we already had, or some duplication, of course. So it's a bit easier there, but for Scotland, unfortunately, no is the short answer.
Thanks, Marek. Next question for both of you. What do Marek and Graham think about the potential for using the 4-day-a-week movement, 100% pay, 100% productivity for 80% of the time? Graham, do you want to answer that first, and then I'll bring you in, Marek?
Yeah, I mean, I guess one of the interesting reflections from that is, again, the results that come through the Working Life Scotland survey and the response from people. Actually, people are saying that they work exceptionally hard, and even a 5-day a week, and actually their energy is sapped after 5-day a week. So there's some really interesting discussions to be had about, well, what would that look like if you move down to a 4-day a week, and the potential implications of that. 2 points about that. So one is, I think the evidence is not fully clear on the implications of that either way. So on the one hand, you're right, if you can actually get people to be productive for a shorter period of time, then actually the outcome might be quite positive. But we are still talking about taking away 20% of people's activity. And for some people, that will have a negative impact on their ability to work and their ability to do the job they're doing. Will have implications for business too. So it's with all these things, there's benefits, but also costs. And I think one of the really interesting things I think over the next few years will be is, well, what might this start to look like if we explore the idea about moving to a 4-day week? I mean, we've tried that in the university during the crisis. We've had a wellbeing day every Friday to give people an opportunity to catch up on things. And again, this is a really interesting reflection to see, once we get to the end of this, has that been beneficial, or has it actually had some challenges too?
Marek?
all I would say is that the evidence is currently still quite sketchy on this. There's a few case studies, few interesting case studies that you can find worldwide, but there's very little in terms of proper academic research on this. I think the interest will pick up rapidly in this, especially when you consider things like having to, for example, deep clean a workplace on one day, allowing, for example, employees to be away from the workplace for a whole day so it can be deep cleaned. The one thing that I would always, my personal frustration is always that people seem to conflate two things, one of them being a 4-day week, meaning you actually lose the one Friday, for example. They tend to conflate that with this idea of compressed hours, so working your 5-day week across 4 days, which is of course a completely different thing, which might also work for some people. So I'm always conscious that politicians tend to conflate those two issues. So we'll hope to see a bit more clarity on that.
Thanks. We are running out of time, but we've got a couple of questions. So I'm just going to ask these two last questions, and then that'll be us. What can you say about the gender pay gap under these circumstances? Will the gender pay gap become larger in the following months, and will the government reintroduce the mandatory gender pay gap reporting for companies? Graham, do you want to come in first, and then I'll bring Marek in?
Yeah, I was just typing up an answer which I can put through. I mean, I can't personally comment too much around gender pay gap within companies. It's not some area that we look at. But one thing I would say though is that we've done quite a lot of analysis about what sectors are disproportionately likely to be impacted by this crisis. And what we find is that it's sectors that are heavily dominated by women working in that. So with the gender pay gap at a society level is probably likely to widen because of that sectoral split. And we also know that women tend to be disproportionately enrolled in less secure work. And again, in crises like this, these are the jobs that unfortunately take the hit the most. Sorry, that's my 9-month-old son screaming in the background. Just apologies for that.
Okay. Thanks, Graham. Marek, I don't know if you want to add anything to that?
One of the things that we did highlight in this presentation as well is that women tend to have more, the caring responsibilities are still heavily gendered. So it's women that tend to do more of the caring, either be it childcare or elderly care. So if we really are going through a period of very significant adjustment of how we work, it is unfortunately still likely that women will suffer more because they will be the ones that will withdraw from the labor market to look after children, look after other relatives. So it is likely that there will be an impact on that level. When it comes to the actual gender pay gap reporting, I know that there's some work that we have planned on this UK-wide. Our expert on this is Charles Cotton, whom you may have seen on this, and we will be talking about this a lot more in the coming months.
Perfect. And just the last question, I know we're creeping into your time, but this is for you, Marek. Is the Working Life Scotland survey or a survey version available to use at an organisational level? For example, can you take the survey as a template, ask your own workforce and use the national figures as a benchmark? Obviously, there are lots of different employee surveys available, but I think it would be a good measure of fair work perceptions in your own organisation, particularly where you are already committed to fair work framework.
So, as far as I'm aware, there is no template. There is no template that you can use. There's obviously nothing stopping organizations to take the questions from the survey and create their own survey based around that framework. And I think that would be an excellent thing to do. Maybe it's something actually for us to discuss internally, whether this is something as a metric to take forward. So we'll take that away and think about whether it is something that we could potentially do as a template.
Thank you very much. Just before everyone goes, yeah, I was just going to highlight, we've got some resources here if you want to have a look. And Lee, I don't know if you want to just say anything before we...
No, we're over on time, so I promised that we would keep to time at the very beginning.
Oh, my fault, I'm sorry.
Oh, no. So there's lots, so as Marek said before, And as Graham's alluded, as mentioned too, please take the time to look at the survey. There is a lot of information there that Marek's very succinctly gone through some of it. As Olivia's put a slide up in front of us, it talks about the next Policy Forum event, which is taking place on the 14th of July, and a couple of other areas that you can connect through to, including the Propel Hub that Graham mentioned. And it just, all I need to do now is thank you for listening. As always, we welcome your thoughts, your views, your observations. This is just the start of this, so we will be, there's areas that need a lot more exploration, and we will be holding different discussion groups and different ways for you to engage and connect with the report over the coming weeks and months, so watch this space. And I would just like to thank our speakers, particularly Graham, because at the very beginning, Graham, I omitted to say that, to thank you for actually contributing to the report in the first place. So I'm glad I've had the opportunity to do that now. So Graham, with his Fraser of Allender and his role as Director of Fraser of Allender Institute, has actually contributed to the report, which we're delighted about. So thank you. And have a lovely afternoon, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. Bye, everyone.